it's still coming in, but that's fine. So I just want to say, because I forget to introduce myself these days, because I see you all the same people coming up, and I never think to, but maybe there's some people that are watching for the first time. So my name's Deb Canham, and I'm a sewing educator, and I like to work with sergers and cover stitch machines. And this week I am going to do a continuation of last week. So if this is the first one you've watched, you need to go back and watch Facebook 64, which is the first part of this class. I mean, it's not essential. Just make sure you go back and watch it, because there are some things in there that might help you, such as stitch size, needles, that kind of thing. But I am going tonight to be carrying on working with that subject, and it is cover stitching hems, using cover stitch hems on knit items, knit fabric. And it really is the same story with wovens. It's just that I chose to use knits because I think more people use knits than use wovens to hem these days. A lot of t-shirt making and things going on. So that's where I'm going to go with that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add that some of you have sergers, and I know that this isn't something you can do if you don't have cover and chain stitch, but you may want to watch because it may influence whether you get a cover and chain stitch machine. Remember, you can buy freestanding cover and chain stitch machines. The Babylock's latest machine out is the Euphoria, and that's a standalone cover and chain stitch machine. So you may be interested in that. Next week, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same subject, hemming knitwear, but we're actually going to do it on the serger. So if you don't have cover stitch and chain, you can see how we do it on the serger. So good to see you all. Right, so cover stitch. Last week, I actually rewatched what I did last week to see if I made any mistakes, because I'm quite capable of doing that. And I did tell you to use narrow, and the reason I chose to tell you that is you will find very few problems with cover stitch narrow. Okay, it doesn't tend to tunnel as much as the wide stitch. But so tonight I thought what I'd do is I'd demo using cover stitch wide, and what I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you the hem guides, because I think the hem guide is super cool. And if you don't have a hem guide, I'm going to give you some options. And then I'm going to show you cover stitch in the round and hemming, and then how to lock your stitches. Okay, so Brenda, I'm feeling a lot better this week. Thank you. Thank you. So let me get started on that. So what I'm going to do is actually show you the two hem guides. So I'm going to take you to the machine to do that. And it doesn't matter what make machine you have, you will probably have a hem guide. Now, not everyone does, but most do. And this is the hem guide for the Evolution and the old cover and chain stitch machine. And you can see it's not as exciting as the new one, but this is the one that fits on your machine. The one I'm going to show you now only fits on certain Babylock machines. And they are, let me show it to you, it's kind of hidden by the instructions. They are, interestingly enough, because I didn't know this until I checked it out this afternoon, this fits on the Ovation and Triumph and Euphoria. So no surprise there. It needs that bigger harp area. But you know, it actually fits on the Sashiko machine and the Jazz. The Jazz is a quilting sewing machine. So there's something I didn't know. And I always print out the notes, and on the notes I've given you the numbers for these guides, only they're terribly similar, and they're both called fabric guides. So make sure you get the right numbers, the right code for it. And as I said, they're on the file. Oops, you know what I didn't bring? I didn't bring a screwdriver, but I'm sure I've got one somewhere. So what I'm doing is I'm putting the guide onto the machine, and you'll see it has small flat screws, and that's because you don't want the big white ones, because they will get in the way when you're using this particular attachment. So I'm just going to screw it on. Now, let me tell you, there are instructions in this in the box that comes with this attachment, and I would advise you read them, and you may prefer to use it the way they say, because, you know, I use it slightly different because I never get around to reading instructions. So this is the way I use it. So I have secured it to the machine, and you can see that this tab slides backwards and forwards, okay? Now my machine is set up for cover stitch wide, because I thought we'd do wide this week. And here's the stitch that it's going to produce. I've already tried it out earlier today, and you see it does produce a nice stitch. And if you get everything right, tensions and particularly the chain looper on 0, you don't get tunneling. Now last week I tried to get tunneling so I could show you what it looked like, and I was able to do it this week because I basically can you shut the door, Richard? I basically put my chain looper tension up really high, and that, see how that caused this to tunnel. Okay, so that's what tunneling looks like, and we're trying to avoid that. And if you watched last week's Facebook, I said that the 2 ways to avoid it are to put your chain looper on 0, and sometimes to make your stitch length smaller or bigger. It depends. Anyway, we're looking at cover stitch wide, and that's the hem here, and there it is sewn. And as I said last week, if you don't like the excess fabric that sticks up above the hem stitching, then you can certainly cut that off carefully. Just don't cut the front of the t-shirt, because it's easy to do. Okay, so there, I've cut it off and it looks great. And with a wide stitch you could sew over the edge if you wanted to, but it's kind of a risky thing. You might just be better off cutting off afterwards. So how do I use this guide? What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piece of fabric, and this is just a flat piece of fabric. I'm not going to use all of it, so let me cut some off. And you know, when you stitch cover stitch, you're actually doing hems. You stitch from this side, don't you? So you can't actually see where the hem is. So this is how I use this machine. I'm using the 1 and the 3 needles, and I'm actually going to have my hem just level with my foot, because that way I know the 1 and 3 needle are going to be safely on that hem. Now I can't stitch it from this side, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this guide and I'm going to slide it along until it reaches the folded edge. Do you see that? And then I'm going to lock it. And then I'm going to turn it over and stitch. And I'm going to keep the folded edge up to this metal piece here. Okay. And I'm using my differential feed on 1.3, and I'm actually using my regular foot because I thought more of you will have that, but there are several choices. You could use the open-toed foot, you could use your see-through foot. I don't tend to use a see-through foot if I'm using differential, but see, there you have it on the back. I would trim that excess fabric, and it looks really nice from the front, and it'll always look even nicer when you have pressed it. Okay, so there's the front. So duckbill scissors are really great for that. That saves you cutting the edge. That was a great suggestion, Linda. Okay, some of you are talking about missing your screws that came with your fabric guide. Yes, they do come in a little yellow plastic bag in the box, and they should be in your package, so you may need to go back in and see if you've got that little yellow plastic one. You can see the problem if I use the white ones. See, they will stand up, and they could be in my way. In actual fact, they're not, but if I decided to move this further along, they would be. Because let's just give it a minute and talk about this. So you can make you don't just have to use it for hems. You can use it for a guide. Somebody asked me the other night, they said they were piecing together for quilting, and they wanted to use chain stitch, but they wanted something like the lace applicator foot so they could have a guide. But see how you could use this? You could set this up for 1/4 of an inch and put all your quilting pieces in here. How neat is that? Okay, so this is a fabric guide. It doesn't have to be a hem. It's just there as a guide. Okay, so what if you don't have this particular guide? Well, you could certainly use tape. You can put tape on your machine and mark where you want to put your hem. Let's have a look. Let's have a hem. So if you know where your stitching is, you want your stitching, you could put some tape on instead of this guide. And another thing I've seen people use is a Lego block or something like that, and they've obviously used something to attach it to the machine. And I like that idea because it's a butted end and you just have to put it up to it. So there's another suggestion. I'm just going to bring you around to me for a minute. Now, I actually think this is a great attachment, and I think it's well worth the money, and I think there's a number of times when you can use it. So you might want to put that on your need to have list. So what stitch would you use for piecing? I would use chain stitch. And what size? I would probably use 2.5 stitch length. And I would probably increase my chain loop refraction for that. Okay, do I have any other questions? Those of you that don't have screws, you need to get back to your dealers and see if they can help you. Right, so what I wanted to say was, it's like I said last week, I basically go to the iron and I press my hems, and I don't use pins, and I don't feel I have a need to. Now, knit fabric, if you pull on it, it will curl. Okay, it will curl towards the front. So that can be a pain, but I use steam, and I steam it, and I let it dry. Okay, I don't pick it up when it's wet because that will cause it to stretch, and then it will curl again. But the other thing is, say I am doing something, I've already sewn this together, so it is ready for me to show you how I work cover stitch in the round. But I just want to say that what I always do is I always press my hems before I sew things up, just because it's easier to press a hem flat on a flat piece of fabric than it is in a round. And then what I do is when I go to sew it together, I open it up and match my folded edges, my press folded edges, and then I sew it. Okay, and then I might press it again. And on that subject, I also use a clapper to get my seams really flat. I use a clapper, and I kindly got given 2 clappers, and one of the people on our group here, her husband makes them. Her name's Jan Squires, and I have put the details on how you can get hold of her if you wish to buy them in the notes. Okay, the notes, for any of you that don't know, are a written file with just my notes in. They're very basic, and they are put in my group, Deb Callum Surger Sanity Projects, under files. Okay, and it's Facebook 65. So what I do is I press it with steam, and then I put this on it, and the steam absorbs into the wood, and it really flattens down my seams. Okay, I can't live without clappers, and pressing is everything. So do I have any questions? I accidentally have 2 guides. Me too. And the reason for that was when I first ordered it, I ordered the wrong one because they're very similar. There's just one number different in the 2 guides. So I have 2 too. Okay.
Is there a guide for the Evolve?
Sorry?
Is there a guide for the Evolve?
The Evolve would use this one. Okay, the old-fashioned one. I say old-fashioned, I don't mean old-fashioned. It's just not as fun as the other one because it doesn't have a sliding bar, okay? But it's still a guide. Right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how I do the in the round. So imagine, because you know I like you to imagine, this is the bottom of a sleeve, okay? I've just chopped the top bit off. Okay, so I have it all ready to go. I have it pressed beautifully, and I am now going to set my guide, and then I'm going to sew round and I'm going to sew over the initial stitches for in the round. Now when you sew in the round, you always need to sew with the sleeve turned inside out, okay, because you're going to be stitching on the inside of it. So it's easier to stitch on the inside of it, and that's how you get to it. Okay, so I'm just going to cover that again. So if you were confused, because I can confuse very well, then you'll hear that again. So let me just go back to the machine. So here it is, and it's quite small. You can see that. Now, let me just, before we even do this, let me say, what if this was a child's sleeve that's half the size? It would not fit in the round. You'd have to sew it flat. You'd have to hem it and then sew the side seam together, okay? So for any children's wear or anywhere where it's a really tight circle, this will fit. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure that I have my hem guide in the right place, and I am going to slide it up here. I'm going to put this edge level with the edge of the foot. I'm using the 1 and 3 needle, and there we go, and I'm going to lock it down. Okay, I need to sew from the inside, and there it is. Now when you first start off, you may have a thread chain, so you may want to just take a few stitches and pull on your threads just so you can get the hem under the foot. Otherwise it can be difficult. And what I'm going to do is just pop it in. I'm going to go for the seam area. Okay, I just need to pull it a bit more. Did you see that, how I couldn't quite get my hem in there? That does happen, so be aware of it. Right, now I can get it in quite easily without causing the fabric to fold. Right, I have my differential feed on, and this is quite a small sleeve seam, but I didn't want you to sit there for ages while I sewed it, so here we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a few stitches, and if it starts moving away or anything like that, I'm just going to lift my foot and reapply the pressure. Okay, right, what I want to do is I'm going to sew all the way around. Keeping that folded edge against the hem guide. I know it's not awfully easy to see what I'm doing because it's a small area. These threads here, what I need to do is I absolutely need to cut them off at this point. Okay, I don't want them. I'm going to sew over those stitches, so I'm going to cut all the threads off so I don't end up with a mess when I get there. Okay, so just keeping on going. And by rights, if I've done this right, it should come up to the stitches in the right place, because I want to literally run my stitches over these old stitches. And the clue I'm going to get is, do you remember you've got notches on the front of this foot, needle 1, needle 3, and I need to get these stitches under it for it to match up. Now I've used my regular foot, but I have some other alternatives which I'm going to suggest to you as well. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to meet up with that stitching. I didn't do it perfectly, but that's okay. Right, so I'm going to lift my foot and I'm going to turn the hand wheel towards me so that my needles go all the way down to the bottom and they come all the way up to the top. And remember, I've got my foot up so my threads are released, and I'm going to pick up my Allen key and I am going to pull the needle threads out above the needles, okay, just in this area here, because that's the easiest place. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my Allen key, I'm going to slide it under my foot so that it's between the foot and the top of the fabric. And what I'm going to do is pull on those threads to bring them out to the front, okay? And there's the threads. Do you see them on the Allen key here? What I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut them. And then what I'm going to do is just pull straight back. And what that does is it pulls all my threads to this side, okay? So both my needle threads are now on the back. And if you look on the front, there are no needle threads. And I didn't go perfectly over the stitching. So I'm going to try another foot and do it again. But what I'm going to do now is I am going to tie this off, okay? The stitches are pretty much locked, but I don't think it does any harm to be double sure. So I'm just going to tie them off, and then I'm going to cut them. And that is that. Okay, and that's chain stitching around. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same again, just so that I can show it to you one more time for repeat. But this time I'm actually going to use my favorite foot for this. And this is the open toe foot. And you see how it has really strong lines that come down here? Makes it really much easier for me to match up the cover stitch at the beginning and end. At least it normally does. But you could also use your see-through foot. Right, so I'm going to do exactly the same thing again. I'm going to check where the needles are, and this hem's actually pressed bigger. I'm going to match the raw edge with the edge of the foot. Match it up there, that's near enough. Okay, and then I am going to sew from the right side in the circle. Okay, right, so I'm going to whiz round. Keeping that folded edge against this metal bar. Right, I'm going to trim these threads so that I don't have a mess. I'm going to use my sharper scissors, they barely cut. Just going to cut the chain looper thread. And then I'm just going to keep on coming. But this time, can you see that I have the red marks on my foot at the front, but best of all, there's a gap in this foot, and I can absolutely see where the match-up is. Right, so I'm going to raise my foot, I'm going to move the hand wheel towards me, only move it towards you, never move it away, until my needles are at the very top. Remember, my foot is up, so that's releasing the tension. I'm going to pull on these threads so that I have some slack, and then I'm going to slide my Allen key underneath the foot on top of the fabric. Just going to do that again because I got caught up on the bar of the hammer. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is cut my threads. And then I'm going to pull straight back. And you see that? See what a better match-up it is when I use the open-toed foot? It's not perfect, but remember, you're going to press this. When I press it, it's going to be a little bit flatter. So where I pulled the stitches, it's pulled it slightly. And then what you're going to do is cut the chain looper thread and tie off that thread. And there is cover stitching around, and you can trim off the excess fabric if you wish. Isn't that super cool? So let me have a look at questions. Richard has just left me because I actually haven't asked him much this evening, so he probably thinks I don't need him. But anyway, let's have a look. Do we have any questions? Where'd you get a good clapper? I told you, I actually, this is probably the nicest clapper I've ever felt. It feels really good. And they come in 2 sizes, and Jan Squire, she's on this group. Jan, if you're on, I'm sure you are, can you put some way for them to contact you? Can Can I use the, no, do not use, well, of course you can use the curve foot. You can use any foot you like, but I would recommend you don't use the curve foot, just purely because we're using differential feed, and the curve foot's much shorter, so it's not in contact with the feed dogs as much. So it's actually not particularly recommended for knits. That doesn't mean you can't try it, but it's not perhaps the best foot for that. What is the wood? I have no idea. I just know that it feels wonderful. Any other questions? Oh, Jan's put a link up for you to contact her. Great. And another thing I like about these is these are actually handheld ones. The one I have has a big, it's tall and it's actually quite large. I got the large one because I lost my small one, but I now have two, and I'm going to be very careful with those. So what else am I going to tell you? What have I not told you? I told you how to do hemming in the round and how to release the threads. Releasing the threads is not complicated, okay? It's just a few steps. I have them written down for you. Just follow them.